I'm going back to help interview the other witnesses. If she wakes up before I get here and says anything, write it down for me." I nodded. "And Mr. Blue," she said. I looked at her. It wasn't a mistake. It made my day. Meanwhile, Angela. I woke up to an unimaginable level of pain in my shoulder and in the side of my head. I tried to reach up and touch my head, but my arm wouldn't move. The other arm had tubes attached to it. My throat felt as if it was as dry as the Sahara. "Lucas," I croaked out. A nurse came into the room. She walked over and gave me some water to drink. It lubricated my throat to the point that I could talk. She smiled at me. "Welcome back," she said. "Lucas," I repeated. "I'll get him," she said. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, Lucas was in the room. He was standing at the foot of my bed looking at me. "Lucas, it was Jerry," I said. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I should have." I stopped talking immediately as a sheriff's deputy came into the room. He looked at Lucas, who was standing at the foot of the bed. "Is she all right?" he asked. Lucas just shrugged his shoulders. "Can I go now?" he asked. The deputy looked at him strangely. "Sir, isn't this your wife?" he asked. "Aren't you concerned?" "Look," said Lucas. "We're getting a divorce." "We are not," I said. The deputy looked at both of us. "She cheated on me," said Lucas. "I have. It was the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life, and I was seduced into it," I said. "I've already told him it'll never happen again, but he won't forgive me." "Would you?" Lucas asked the deputy. "If the woman you'd married and been with for over 10 years was screwing some guy in a sleazy motel, and it went on for over a month, what would you do?" "Maybe, and I do mean may screwing be, you could get over it if it had only happened once. But when it went on for a month and she lied to you multiple times about it, what would you do?" The deputy couldn't think of anything to say. "And as far as my concern goes, you have witness statements. I wasn't there and I didn't shoot her, so I have no concern in this at all. My only concern is that this will delay my divorce even further," spat Lucas. "Another thing," he said. "The other deputy brought me here so I could possibly help if she said anything. From speaking to the nurses, she's going to be fine. They said there was a problem, but it wasn't life-threatening. She got shot in the head and in the shoulder. The bullet was removed from her shoulder. The shot to the head glanced off of her skull. Neither of those injuries prevents her from talking. So anything you need to ask her, you can ask her yourself." The deputy nodded, and Lucas asked him if he could get someone to drive him back out to the farm. For some reason, that deputy decided to drive Lucas home himself. Another deputy arrived and was going to do it, but the two of them were arguing until finally she stepped into the room. She had black hair arranged in one of those styles that not everyone can wear. I'd look ridiculous with my hair like that, but she pulled it off. It was way longer on one side than it was on the other, and she kept shaking it out of her eyes. Men love that kind of shit. They think it's sexy as all get out. I hated that witch on sight and decided not to talk to her. "Mrs. BL, what do you want me to call you?" she asked. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "My name is Angela Blue. Everyone knows that." Your husband gave me the impression that a divorce was a foregone conclusion," she said. "Well, it's not," I snapped harshly. "Lucas is still upset. Not that it's any of your business. What do you want anyway?" "Well, I need to ask you some questions about what happened at the bank," she said. "Some men came in and took the money," I said. She looked at me like I was an idiot, so I gave her the same look right back. "I got shot in the head. My memory is spotty," I told her. "When do you think it might get better?" she asked. Then I did the absolute dumbest thing I've ever done. "It might not get better at all," I said. "The doctors said that some things I may never remember. They said it had to do with traumatic experiences. Then again, I always seem to remember things better when Lucas is around. Even before this happened, just having my husband near me or holding my hand makes my memory better." She looked at me and her eyes narrowed. She put down her pad and nodded her head. "Your husband or your ex-husband is neither a suspect nor a person of interest in this case. If I drag him out here again, and you don't come up with something, I may charge you with something." "Oh God, my head hurts," I screamed. Instantly, 3 nurses ran into the room. "I think it's the stress of trying to remember so much so fast," I whined. She just laughed and shook her head. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Yes," I smiled. Under the right circumstances, I might be ready by then. Meanwhile, Lucas. As soon as the deputy left, I went into the house and looked in the freezer. I grabbed myself a steak and started to marinate it. I beat the crap out of it to tenderize it and poured the flavoring agents over it. I went out behind the house and started my grill. Then I went into the barn and started a pallet of parts. If it hadn't been for all of that bullshit at the hospital, I have done 4 or 5 pallets by now. I left the barn and went back to check the grill. I'd almost made it when the car drove up. I tried to pretend I didn't see her. "Oh, come on. I'm not that bad," she yelled, catching up to me. "Mr. Blue, I really need your help," she said. "How now?" I began. She held up her hand and spoke into her radio. "This is Tanya. I'm off. I'll be back at the hospital first thing in the morning to try again." Then she went back to her car. I saw her fiddling around in there, and I thought I saw flashes of skin, but I couldn't be sure. When she got back out of the car, she had on cut-off shorts that showed those incredible, thick, sculpted legs. They were long enough that they covered her bum completely, but tight enough to tease the hell out of you. She had a very thick sweater on up top. Too thick for the time of year, but I realized that she probably needed it. "Mr. Blue, would you like to have dinner with me? I need to ask you a really big favor." She smiled as she said it and flipped her hair out of her face. It was over before it began. "Uh-huh," I said. "Wait, I can't. I've already got a steak marinating." "That sounds great for me," she said. "Do you have one for yourself too?" We both laughed, and she followed me to the kitchen. Naturally, being a woman, she told me that I was doing the steaks wrong. I let her do it her way, and we headed out to the grill. After putting the steaks on the grill, we sat back on the deck as the sun began to settle in the evening sky. "It's really pretty here," she said. I nodded. "Okay, officer," I began. "Tanya," she interrupted. "Tanya," I started again. "Why are you here?" "You mean other than eating your steak, drinking your beer, and watching the sun set on your deck?" She smiled. "I spent some time with your wife," she said. "Very soon-to-be ex-wife, you mean?" I spat. "Wow," she said, smiling as she got up to turn the steaks. "It's good to see that you're already over the bitterness." I just looked at her. "Anyway, your ex is a real piece of work. You'd think that she'd be willing to do anything it takes to help us catch the guys who robbed the bank and killed Ted Granger, especially since they shot her too. But nope. She's trying to use whatever she knows as some kind of bargaining chip to get you to talk to her. I can't understand her." "That makes 2 of us," I said. "We moved here right after we got married because it seems like a great place for us to raise kids. It's away from all of the bullshit and the rat race of the bigger cities. I thought we had it all worked out and we were happy. I found out that she'd been screwing that jerk for a month behind my back. So roughly the last 5 or 6 weeks of my life have pretty much been a lie. She tells me, of course, that it had nothing to do with us. She was bored and she hates her job. I just don't get why that made her cheat on me if it is true." "Did she start telling you that she loves you and the sex meant nothing yet?" asked Tanya. That was the one that hurt me the most. I mean, if it didn't mean anything, but it hurt me. "I mean you so badly, why would they do it?" "Oh, it meant something," I said. "It meant that there is no way I can stay married to her." "Well, I really hate to ask you this," she said, brushing that hair out of her face again and getting up to take the steaks off of the grill. "But I need a favor," she continued, as she dropped the bigger of the 2 steaks in front of me. "Could you go and see her tomorrow morning with me?" she asked, staring at me. Those pale gray eyes bore into mine like twin spotlights. They said so much without the need for words. They told me that she really had been through what I had, and it had scarred her far worse than my experience had. Perhaps that was why she just couldn't see how amazing she was. The fact that some a-hole had cheated on her repeatedly destroyed her self-esteem. At that moment, there was no way I'd refuse her anything. It came as a complete shock to both of us when I said, "No." "Lucas, would you do it for me?" she asked. She turned up the intensity of her eyes a notch and I audibly gulped, which caused her to smile. "Oh my God, I have to get you to an eye doctor," she gushed. "You really do have a thing for me, don't you?" She tried to avoid embarrassing me by changing the subject. "So what time should I pick you up in the morning?" she asked. "We don't have to go," I said. "Why not?" she asked. "Because she told me something when she first woke up. She said that Jerry had done it." And Jerry was the one who shot her, I said. Who the hell is Jerry? She asked seriously. Jerry is the a-hole she's been screwing, I spat. Maybe you don't have to go, she smiled. I can force your wife to give us a description of him now. If she refuses, I can charge her with withholding information or obstruction of justice. And then she'll just pretend that her memory comes and goes, I said. But you still don't need her. Why not? She asked. Because you can have a copy of this, I said. I pulled out my iPhone and showed her the video I'd taken. It's high-definition video, and it's very clear. I'm sure you'll want the original, so just return the phone to me when your people make a copy for themselves. I've already given my lawyer a copy. I'm going to use it for leverage in the divorce. Before I could say a word, Tanya reached out and kissed me. I think she meant to kiss me on the cheek, but one of us must have moved the wrong way because she ended up kissing me right smack in the mouth. We both must have been shocked because neither of us moved away. Sorry, she said. That wasn't supposed to happen. You aren't even divorced yet. Oh well, it's not like you didn't like it, she smiled. I hated it, I said. I should bring you up on charges for abusing your authority. If you hated it so much, why didn't you push me away? She asked. But don't worry, since you hated it so much, you won't be getting any more of them. I take it back, I said so quickly that it made her laugh. She picked up my phone and said, I have to go and drop this off at the office so they can start extracting pictures from the video and get an APB out for this guy. Thanks, Lucas. No problem. I started to say before she interrupted me by kissing me again. This one was even longer than the first one. I meant that one, she said. Meanwhile, Angela. What the hell? I screamed as I looked at myself in the mirror for the first time in days. Those a-hole doctors had shaved my head near where the bullet hit me. I suppose it had been necessary, and in time it would grow back. But Lucas loves my hair. Sometimes at night he brushes it for me. He gives it long, slow, loving strokes. He doesn't hurry or rush through it. He simply brushes it for the enjoyment of doing it. Of course, on a good night, he'll follow that up by warming up some lotion and giving me a very gentle, very complete massage that sets my whole body tingling. We usually end up making slow, passionate love until... It'll grow back, ma'am, said the nurse holding the mirror for me. My left arm was completely immobilized. If I moved it, they were worried that the stitches in it might leave a more unsightly scar or give me an infection. They had taken the tubes out of my right arm last night, but it was still hard to make yourself look presentable with only one hand. What time are the police coming? I asked her. They're in and out all day, she said. It could be any time, but I'm sure they realize that you've been shot, so you don't have to try to make yourself look pretty for them. Her smile as she said that made me wonder how she'd gotten through medical school. That evil witch who was here last night is supposed to be bringing my husband to see me, I said. Her eyes lit up. That's different, she said. Aren't you married to that guy who won the race last Sunday? He's a dreamboat. You're braver than I would be. What do you mean? I asked. Shit, my husband doesn't look anything yours, honey, but there's no way I'd want him around that woman. It's like opening the birdcage and telling the cat to watch your parakeet, she said. Then realizing that she probably said too much, she changed the subject. Not that you have to worry about anything like that. Your marriage is very solid, isn't it? So he'd have no reason to look for anyone else. But if it wasn't, then I'd be worried. I did the best I could. I put on makeup and lipstick and fine-tuned it until I looked as good as I could. Luckily, the doctors had only shaved the area around where the bullet grazed me, so I was able to comb my hair down over it. If you didn't know what to look for, it was barely noticeable. After the nurse left, I started going over what I'd say to both the Keystone cops and, more importantly, to Lucas. First, after thinking about it, I realized that telling the deputies anything about my relationship with Jerry would probably be a mistake. I doubted that they'd believe that I didn't know that he was going to rob the bank. I'd believed everything he told me about working for a movie company. The less they knew about that, the better. I'd let them believe that I was just an innocent bank employee who got shot during the robbery. The only other person who knew that I knew Jerry was Ted, and unfortunately, though fortunate for me, he was dead. In a way, that was my fault. As for Lucas, I had to play this perfectly. The longer we were apart, the greater the chance that I wouldn't get him back. He was seemingly adjusting to living without me far faster than I would ever have thought. And judging from the reaction of those stupid women at the bank and even the nurses in the hospital, Lucas could replace me fairly easily if he got lonely. There had to be a way for me to get him to get over this. I was sure that if I put my mind to it, I could come up with something. Breakfast came and went with no cops. I was beginning to get frustrated. I actually thought about calling the sheriff's department myself. For several hours, I fussed around in my bed trying to think of what I'd do about saving my marriage, when suddenly it hit me. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was nothing. I'd get the doctors to tell Lucas that I needed someone to take care of me. They'd already told me that I could go home in a couple of days if I had someone to watch over me. I'd also play up the one bad arm thing to the hilt. Lucas had always taken good care of me anyway. It was one of the ways that even when we were dating, I knew that he'd be a great father someday. He's caring and compassionate, and above all else, he has a sense of fairness that is just incredible. And while he's taking care of me, I can tell him what I now suspected. My new theory was that Jerry used me to get information about the bank. He just played up my boredom with my life to work his way into my affections to get information out of me about the bank. I'd also have to tell Lucas that he couldn't tell the police anything about Jerry because he might come back to try to finish the job. I was sure that Jerry had only shot me to let the police know that I was innocent. Even when he pulled the trigger, I could see the love in his eyes. I wouldn't tell Lucas that part though. What he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. And things between Jerry and I were over anyway. They'd ended for me the day that Lucas caught us. It had been fun, but it wasn't worth losing my marriage over. Just as I was thinking about how to finalize my plan and possibly get the doctor or one of the nurses to call Lucas, one of the nurses came into my room. The security desk just called. "The deputy is on her way up," she said, smiling brightly. "And she has a man with her." I quickly arranged my hair and leaned back against my pillows. I was shooting for a pose that was both sexy and vulnerable at the same time. I wanted Lucas to think about how much he loved me and missed me, but I also wanted to arouse his protective instincts as well. You can't spend as much time with someone as Lucas and I had over the years without developing some degree of empathy for them. When he saw me in pain, it would hopefully bring those instincts out in Lucas. Just as Little Miss, "My shit doesn't stink," sashayed into my room, followed closely by a man, I let out a well-timed moan of pain. Actually, the rise in my voice that sold it was genuine. It wasn't genuine pain, though. They had me so doped up that I couldn't feel shit. What caused my voice to rise wasn't pain. It was surprise. The man with her wasn't my Lucas. It was some grizzled old guy. He looked like a Sam Elliott clone, and he was wearing a sheriff's department uniform like hers. "Where's Lucas?" I asked her heatedly. "He didn't want to come," she snapped back, just as heatedly. "Oh boy," I said. "I think I'm getting dizzy. Maybe I'd better call the nurse." "Maybe I should handle this," said the man. "There seems to be something going on between the two of you that might not be good for my investigation." "I'm the sheriff," he said. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Rod Shorter." "Who the hell is that?" I asked him. "He's the man you knew as Jerry," he said slowly. "It may be another alias, though." "I don't know any Jerry either," I said. He stood up and walked around the room. He shrugged his shoulders at the female deputy. "Well, Tanya," he said, "I've tried to shield you from this kind of thing, but you have to grow up sometime." She just nodded and smiled. I was wondering what the hell he was talking about when he suddenly stopped pacing and glared straight at me. "All right, witch," he spat. "Here's how this really works. I don't give a flying shit about you, your goddamn problems, or the boo-boo on your head. A good man is dead just so some out-of-town a-holes can run off with the money a lot of people in this town worked very hard for. I had no clues to the identities of these men at all, until last night we got a source that helped us out a lot. The problem is that my source's account of what you know differs drastically from yours." My eyes widened and I think he saw it. If I was going by my gut instinct, I'd believe him based on what I've seen of the two of you. He seems to be pretty honest and extremely fair. You, on the other hand, seem to be trying to either use my investigation for your own purposes or to actually cover things up. Then there's the fact that he provided me with evidence to back up his claims. And there's also the fact that his evidence proves that you're lying to me. So unless you'd like to serve out the rest of your recovery and the beginning of your sentence in jail instead of this cushy hospital, you'd better start talking, sister. I thought he was bluffing, so I decided to try to stick to my story. "Oh, call the nurse," I cried. Yeah, he said. Tanya, honey, get the nurse in here. I knew then that he was serious. As soon as the nurse came into the room, he started on her. What's wrong with her? He asked. The nurse looked flustered. I can't release information on a patient or her condition without the patient's consent, she said. Get the doctor in here, he snapped. I breathed a sigh of relief. A few moments later, a doctor came into the room. He looked at the doctor. Doctor, he said, I know all about the HIPAA regulations and how you can't tell me shit about a patient without their consent. I also know that I can pick up my phone and call the judge and have him issue me a warrant for her records and make this shit extremely unpleasant for all concerned. So you and Mrs. Blue here need to figure a few things out either together or separately. One way or another, I'm going to have the information I need. So either A, Mrs. Blue needs to start telling me the truth, or B, you need to answer a few hypothetical questions for me that don't necessarily pertain to Mrs. Blue. Are you willing to do that? There was a very short staring contest, and the doctor blinked. What would you like to know, hypothetically? He gulped. Hypothetically speaking, said the sheriff, if a person got shot in the head and it proved to only be a glancing blow, could that person recover in a prison hospital as well as they could hear a few days after the incident had occurred? Well, theoretically, began the doctor. Okay, I said. I'll tell you what you want to know. Start singing, sister, he said. Do the doctor and the nurse have to be in the room? I asked. Thanks, Doc, he said. Then he tipped his hat to the nurse and they left the room. Look, Mrs. Blue, he began. I really think that we got off on the wrong foot here. I'm not trying to be overly hard on you, and I give you my word that the details of your entanglements and your divorce are not my interest. The only thing I'm trying to do here is bring a murderer to justice. I'm not getting a divorce, I said exasperatedly. My words brought a loud snort from the female deputy. He looked at her pointedly. You and me are going to have a long talk about this later anyway, he told her. Mrs. Blue, I don't want to take up too much of your time. All I really need for you to do right now is to verify some things for me. How long have you known Rodney Shorter? I met him about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I said. How long have you been screwing him? Asked Tanya. I hesitated, and they both looked at me. Look, lady, he said. This will go easier if you just answer the questions. Then we can leave, and you can do whatever you're going to do. Maybe I should show you something first. Okay, I'm going to lay all of my cards on the table here. We'll be totally honest with you. So you'll know what we know, and then you can be totally honest with us. But the next time I get the feeling you're holding something back, I'm throwing your bum in jail for a while. Good luck trying to get your husband back from there. He reached into his pocket and brought out a phone. It was an iPhone 4S like the one Lucas has. He brought up a video and held it in front of my face. The video showed Jerry, or whatever his real name was, just away at me. It was very clear, and both of our faces could be easily identified. My eyes were closed. Whether out of shame or pleasure, I couldn't tell. The most embarrassing thing, though, was something I'd never noticed before. The look on Jerry's face showed anything but lust or pleasure. It looked like he was disgusted. He was even licking his tongue out and making faces at me while he screwed me. It was strange that all the time I'd thought that the sex I'd had with Jerry was intense and special, but seeing it from this angle made it look like two people having a sleazy quickie in a cheap motel. So you can now see why I haven't believed a word out of your goddamned mouth, he said. You can also see that I have a really good case for withholding information too, right? I nodded my head and looked away from him. I was ashamed. Just answer the goddamn questions, okay? He asked. I didn't immediately start sleeping with Jerry, I said. It took him a while to break me down. How long? He asked. 2 weeks? A month? 2 days, I said. But he really? 2 days? Asked Tanya in shock. Jesus, weren't you married at the time? It didn't mean anything, and it has nothing to do with my marriage, I offered. It was just sex. He listened to me and... Did your husband listen to you? She asked. Yes, all the time, I said. We talked every day and... Did your husband ever beat you, or come home drunk and act crazy? She asked. Of course not, I said. Lucas wouldn't hurt a fly, Did he cheat on you or steal from you? She asked. No, I said. Lucas isn't that kind of person. I was about to say something else, but she interrupted me again. Then what the hell is wrong with you, lady? She asked. Do you know how many women there are who would love to have a man like the one you pissed away? Tanya, wait outside, said the sheriff. You and I are still going to have words, Missy. I'm sorry for that, Mrs. Blue, he said. So you immediately started a sexual relationship with Mr. Shorter. We've established that. Was Mr. Shorter one of the men who robbed your bank? Yes, I said. Was Mr. Shorter the man who shot you and Ted Granger? He asked. Yes, I said. Since all of the men were wearing masks, how did you know this? He asked. I recognized his voice when we went into the safe, I said. I asked him not to rob the bank. I tried to get him to just leave. Ted, Jerry, and I went into the safe while the other two men cleaned out the teller's drawers. Go on, said the sheriff. Well, while we were there, he had Ted start emptying the cash drawers in the safe, and I recognized his voice. I said, Jerry, that's you, isn't it? I could tell it was him because we were, close. But I also knew it was him because he was having trouble with his mask. It looked like wearing the mask was painful for him. He kept trying to pull it away from his nose, and it looked like every time he tried to move his side hurt. The last time I'd seen Jerry, Lucas had done a real number on him when he caught us at the motel. He'd broken Jerry's nose and possible several of his ribs. Thank you, Mrs. Blue, said the sheriff. That wasn't so hard, was it? He looked at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion. He tried to cover it up behind a persona of professionalism, but he wasn't that good an actor. We already knew most of this from Mr. Blue and his video. It was very honest of your husband to give us that video, and very helpful as well. He gave it to us unsolicited despite the fact that it could have gotten him in hot water, he said. How could it have gotten Lucas in trouble? I asked. He put the phone down in the window to make the recording, said the sheriff. So he didn't have time to turn it off. The video shows him knocking the shit out of Shorter and then kicking him in the side. That could be used to prove an assault charge against him, but he gave us the video anyway. That takes guts and a willingness to see things done the right way. My niece tried to cover for him by making a copy of the tape and cutting it off before the assault. In actuality, we needed that part of the tape too. Once we found out how your lover had been injured, we checked all of the clinics in town and all of the neighboring towns until we found where he'd been treated. That's how we got his name. He does have a criminal record under that name, so maybe it's his real one. We have an APB out for him nationwide. I'm sure he'll turn up. Stay in town. We may have further questions for you as the investigation proceeds. After the sheriff left, I got the doctor to come back into my room. He seemed to be trying to apologize for almost allowing the sheriff to throw me into jail. I asked him how soon I could be released. He told me that I could actually leave later that day if I had someone to pick me up and watch over me for the next few days. I told him to call Lucas. Meanwhile, I was checking the dimensions on some of the parts I just run when my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and saw that it was the hospital. I walked away from the phone. It could only be the doctor or some member of the hospital staff calling me to inform me of Angela's condition or calling to ask me questions about billing for Angela's treatment. I wasn't interested in either. My health insurance company would handle the billing since she was still covered under my policy. And unless they were calling to tell me that she died during the night or this morning, I really didn't want to hear about her condition. Of course, it could have been Angela herself calling me. I'd be even less interested then. I measured the overall thickness of the parts using a Starrett digital micrometer. The parts on this pallet were well within the allowed tolerances. There'd be no need for me to do any offsets for tool wear on the next batch. I pushed the cycle start button and watched as the tool came down to begin cutting the next blank. I loaded the parts I just measured into a box. I was back on schedule. I'd taken quick naps as I ran parts all through the night. My UPS truck would be here by 4 p.m. this afternoon. I should have all of the parts done by 2 p.m. I decided that another quick nap wouldn't hurt me. It would take the milling center over an hour to run the pallet of parts, and I was a bit tired. I stifled a yawn just as the knocking on the door started. I was pissed. How the hell was I supposed to run my business with all of the constant interruptions? As I opened the door to the cheerful face of Stanley, our mailman, I had to smile. Stan was never unhappy. Whether he was delivering mail in the July heat like today, or the unrelenting chill of a Michigan winter, he was always cheerful. It was hard to be upset around someone like that. Right after Stan left, the phone started ringing again. I picked it up more to get whoever was calling to leave me alone than anything else. "Mr. Blue, can you come in today to take your wife home?" asked a voice on the other end of the line. "No, I can't," I said with mock cheer. "When can you come in?" he asked. "I can't bring her home because I don't know where she lives," I said. "I was under the impression that she resided with you," said the voice. "She will need someone to help her out and look out for her for a few days, I'm afraid." "Call her mom," I said, "or try a nursing home." Then I hung up the phone, thinking that a shower before my nap might be in order. Before I even made it to the door, someone else had started knocking on it. Fate had obviously decided that I was unworthy of sleep. This time, whoever was at the door would feel the brunt of my anger. I'd already taken a breath to yell at whoever it was when those pale gray eyes made me swallow it. "Hi, Lucas." My ears relished the sound of that subtle southern accent, even as my eyes feasted on her curves and smile. She looked up at me and smiled, and then brushed the unruly hair out of those eyes and away from her face. All thoughts and need for a nap vanished instantly. My own face erupted in a spontaneous smile. "Did I catch you at a bad time?" she asked. "I just came to bring you your phone back." "Never too busy to see my favorite law enforcement official," I said. "Are you always this nice to the deputies?" she asked. "Nope, only the gorgeous ones," I said. "All of the gorgeous ones?" she asked, wrapping her arms around me. "Or only the ones who kiss you? Like this?" She stepped up onto her tiptoes and pushed her mouth against mine. Everything stopped. I don't think I even heard the machines running in the background. This kiss was much more urgent than any of the others had been. This time her lips parted and her cherry-flavored tongue met mine, causing electrical impulses to run through both of our bodies. This time she pressed that firm body of hers against me, and I wrapped my arms back against her, pulling her even closer into me. "That's what I thought," she said. "Huh?" I asked, while trying to get the stars flying around in my head out so I could focus again. "Oh God, we're going to have to get you more used to that," she smirked. "Maybe with practice." I nodded excitedly. "So," she began, changing the subject, "we have something to talk about. What are you up to about now?" "Nothing," I said. "The parts I'm working on will be done in about an hour. I finally got the hospital off of my back." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Some doctor kept calling me until I finally answered the phone," I said. "He wanted me to bring Angela home. I think I got it across to him that she no longer lives here." "Ooh, I wish you hadn't done that," she said, looking at me. "Well, part of me is glad you did that, though." "What do you mean?" I asked in my confused state. "Well," she smiled again, "the professional law enforcement part of me thinks that having her in a place that we know about with you to watch her could prevent her from trying to skip town before we get to the bottom of this. I'm sure my uncle would appreciate it too. But the just plain old Tanya part of me likes hearing that you're seriously trying to get that witch out of your life and move on." "Oh," I smiled. "So that's what I wanted to talk to you about," she said, sitting down next to me. "I think there's something going on with us." "Is there?" I asked. "Definitely," she said, "but I need for you to know a few things." I angled my head and looked at her. "First off," she said, "this isn't me. I do not under any normal circumstances go after married men, even when they're getting a divorce. And I especially avoid them when they haven't had time to get over their wives. I also do not go around kissing people I barely know. I do not have sex with men on a first date or the second date or any timetable like that. It is simply not something I would do. I don't interfere with marriages whether they're solid or not. I'm a good girl and I always have been." "I believe you," I said. "I'm not like that either." "But," she said, "I've spent most of my life being a good girl, and all it's ever gotten me was pain. And I have the feeling that you're meant to be something very special in my life. So there's no way I'm going to let you get away. I have to grab onto my chance at happiness with both hands no matter what people think about me. I've had so much pain already in my life that I know when something is good for me, and I think you are. So I just need you to tell me one more time. Are you really going to divorce Angela?" I didn't say anything for a long moment. "Am I talking to Officer Bradley or my plain old Tanya?" I smirked. "Both of them are listening," she said. "And I never said I was your plain old Tanya." "Well, officer," I said, It is my intention to divorce the former Mrs. Blue immediately. Her actions of late have driven her from my affections and done irreparable damage to the state of our marriage. I got up and went over to my desk. I came back and put a copy of my divorce papers on her lap. I have already retained counsel and have had the aforementioned former Mrs. Blue served with these papers. Okay, she said, smiling. Officer Bradley is satisfied of your intentions. She's gone. Now what did you want to tell Tanya? I grabbed her and kissed her again like the one we just had. When we came up for air, I said, I couldn't tell this to the officer. It would be admitting the possibility of me committing a crime. But I'd shoot Angela in the head myself for a kiss like that. You don't have to, she said. You can have as many of them as you want. But that's as far as we're going until you're fully divorced. I looked at her and smiled. I could see two enormous dugs showing through her uniform top. She looked down at them herself when she saw where my eyes were. Probably, she said. Then her phone rang and she answered it. She smiled and put the phone on speaker. I heard the sheriff's voice loud and clear. Damn it, Tanya, he said. Just how long does it take to drive 2 miles and hand a phone to someone? Keep your shirt on, Uncle Steve, she said. You only want me back because you want to go to lunch. Everyone in town knows you have a thing for that waitress. My shirt is still on, he yelled, but I'm wondering about yours. She filled him in on the hospital situation, and he agreed with her that I'd be doing the community a great service by allowing Angela to stay at my house for a while. So I agreed to do it. As I walked her to her car, Tanya looked up at me. Where's she going to sleep? Probably in what used to be our bedroom. I said, Where are you going to sleep? She asked through narrowed eyes. I've been sleeping out here, I said. I will continue to do that. Doesn't your house have more than 1 bedroom? She asked. I nodded. It has 3 or 4, I said. We use 3 of them as bedrooms and 1 as a home office. Then why were you sleeping out here? She asked. Tanya, I have never cheated on Angela, and I never would have, I said, even with someone gorgeous. When I found out that she'd done it to me, I just couldn't stand to be in the same house with her. I moved out here to give her a chance to pack up all of her stuff, so I wouldn't even have to look at her. Oh my God, she said, putting her hand over her mouth. And I kept forcing you to be around her. She gave me another kiss to pay for it. I'll be by here later to check on you, she smirked. As soon as she drove off, I called the hospital and told them I'd be there at 3 to pick up Angela, but they'd have to make sure she was ready when I got there because I had to be home by 4. They assured me that they only had a few moments worth of instructions for me regarding her care, and I could be in and out in minutes. I drove my Jeep to the hospital to pick Angela up. From the moment she got out of the wheelchair, she was leaning against me trying to make as much contact as she could. She called a couple of the bank's employees to find out what was going on in the bank. She found out from them that the bank wasn't reopened yet. Customers were using the ATM machines for deposits and withdrawals. Commercial customers were using the commercial deposit chute. I drove straight home and dropped her off at the house. The UPS truck pulled up a few moments after we'd arrived, so I went out to help the driver load the boxes of parts. I went back to the house to see Angela. I'm so glad you changed your mind about letting me come home, she said. Now that you're being more rational, do you think that we can talk? What would you like to talk about, Angela? I asked. Well, you know, I want to talk about us, she said. Angie, there isn't any us anymore, I said. There's only you and me. We ceased to be us the moment you brought Jerry into it. But don't you see, she said, that wasn't me. That was all him. He tricked me. He seduced me out of purely malicious intentions. He used me. He just wanted information about the bank. Angela, you're a grown woman, I said. You know all about right and wrong. But Lucas, she began. But nothing, I said. Did he drug you? No, she answered. At least I don't think he did. Did he get you so drunk that you lost control? I asked. No, she said again. Did he force you? I asked. Maybe he had a gun to your head? No, she said again. So you had a choice, Angela. You always had a choice. You just made the one that ended any hope of an us. But Lucas, she said, I made a mistake. I've admitted it, and I'm ready to do anything you want to make up for it. Why does this have to be the end of everything we've worked for all of these years? Why throw away everything we have on one stupid mistake that only a handful of people know about anyway? We've already gone over this, Angela, I said. You made a mistake. You were bored. You hated the bank and your job there. You got seduced or tricked. You obviously enjoyed it, or you would have stopped before you got caught. Now you want to make suggestions on how you can fix this. Every word out of your mouth was about you. This whole thing was about you. It wasn't about us, as you said. We had nothing to do with it. So, Angela, to even things out, we have to bring me and what I want into it, right? She nodded her head. Well, I want you to hell out of my life. I want to find someone who'll love me the way I want them to. And you have only proven that you aren't that woman. So I'm divorcing you. Lucas, you're not really serious about that, she said. You're just angry at me and hurt. That's why I haven't even bothered to look at those stupid papers you sent me. We'll get over this in time. Just watch. And that was the way things went for a couple of weeks. I made breakfast for Angela and left it for her. I stayed in the barn running parts and writing programs for new jobs. I made her lunch and returned to the barn. I made her dinner and went back to the barn. Most evenings I wasn't alone. My barn seemed to have its own branch of law enforcement making sure that everything was okay. I was finally able to convince Angela that we needed to have a meeting in my lawyer's office. I'd proposed it several times and even had him send her letters in writing. But something changed because Angela went out and got her own lawyer. She also agreed to a meeting to discuss the divorce. She told me that she had a few things that needed to be noted in the case that might lead to me dropping the divorce, but she wouldn't say what they were. We drove over to the lawyer's office in my Jeep the day of the meeting. Lucas, she asked, it's a nice sunny day. There's no chance of rain. Why aren't we driving your Mustang? You love driving that car? The Jeep is more comfortable for you, I said. I was really thinking that my car has a built-in 304 detector and she couldn't get in it, but I kept my mouth shut. After all, she was going to the lawyer's office, so I was getting what I wanted. An hour later, I left the office so angry that I forgot Angela had ridden over there with me. I just drove off and left her there. Her performance was masterful. She worked it to the hilt. She looked over the papers and agreed to everything I'd proposed. Her lawyer told her that she shouldn't settle for what I was offering. I offered to split everything we had in the bank and our investments with her 50-50, excluding the house and the business. Since roughly a third of my money was allocated for the business, only our personal accounts would be involved. He thought that we should have to split everything 50-50. My lawyer and I showed him the papers where Angela had signed off on not being responsible for the house and thereby my business. Then I explained to him how Angela had not contributed a dime of her income over the years into the household. Most of her money went towards her personal needs and paying off her college debts and paying back her parents. He saw it our way. He tried to argue for some type of alimony. I ignored him and told Angela that I'd hate to use the video. She knew what I meant and told him to let it drop. She grabbed a pen and signed the papers. She handed them to my lawyer and said she didn't need to ask him a question. She asked him whether we could negotiate child support and visitation after the baby was born. Both my lawyer and I were floored. Angela reached into her folder and brought out the results of her latest checkup. I'd taken her only 2 days before and waited to bring her back home. Angela had been smiling nonstop since then. Now I knew why. Both she and I knew that everything would have to be renegotiated now, so the papers she'd signed were worthless. No judge would sign off on them. I drove home and went straight to the barn. I intended to bury myself in work, and then when I'd calmed down enough, to wash my car. About a half hour after I got home, a cab drove up. Angela got out and asked me to pay the driver. I just gave him some money and waved him off. He could keep the change. I was in no mood to talk to anyone. Angela walked into the barn. Get the hell out of here, Angela, I said. I just came to ask you if you wanted to sit down and talk about things, she smiled. We have a lot to talk about now. Like what? I hissed. Like which room we're going to convert to the nursery, she said. Or baby names. I can't get the ultrasound done for a while, yet so we'll have to make a list of both girls' and boys' names. She was smiling and had her hands over her tummy. To tell you the truth, I like Pauline. Like my mom if it's a girl and Lucas Jr. if it's a boy. What do you think? I think that Jerry is going to be really pissed if you name his kid after me. I spat. Her eyes got bigger, and she staggered and sat down on the couch in the corner of the barn. "Lucas, goddammit. Don't make jokes like that," she said. "I almost had a heart attack." "Think about it, Angela," I told her, looking deeply into her eyes. "You and I have been together for a long time. You've never been on the pill because you had problems and complications from them. We don't use condoms. We've always used the spermicidal suppositories. The only time you didn't use them was when you were with Jerry." Her mouth dropped open. "How far along are you?" I asked. "Probably around 2 months, right?" She nodded. "So, more than likely, you and Jerry are going to be the proud parents of a very nice puppy soon. That's even more reason for you to help me hurry this divorce along." "I will not be supporting a murderer's kid," I said. "But maybe the spermicidal failed," she said. "Lucas, I'm sure that this is our baby. It's the baby we've always planned. Well, at least it's the first one. Okay, maybe it's a year or two earlier than we wanted, but we have everything we need. We have the house and the town and the money. There's no reason why we can't just go on with our lives, just like we always planned." "Yeah, there is," I said. "In fact, there are 3 reasons. They're the 3 most important reasons in the world. I don't love you anymore. My life from now on doesn't include you, and it's not my baby. But Lucas, it can be your baby. No one else would ever know. And if you tried forgiving me, we could be happy again. I need you in my life. I don't love Jerry. I love you. The baby, no matter whose baby it is, will need to have a good father in his life, and that isn't Jerry, Lucas, that's you. I've already made the biggest mistake in my life I ever will. I'll spend the rest of it making it up to you. It will never happen again. I swear it," she said. Then I saw her face change. I turned around just in time to see Tanya drive up. "What the hell are you doing here?" asked Angela. "Is the sheriff's department making it a habit to harass innocent citizens? Every man out there who knows his woman can tell how she'll react in certain situations before they ever occur." I knew that Angela had just poked the bear and was about to get clawed. Tanya walked right past Angela and didn't even acknowledge her presence. She got up on her toes and kissed me like her life depended on it. Angela's mouth dropped open in shock. "I really needed that with the day I'm having," said Tanya, wrapping her arm around me protectively. She turned to Angela and said, "I'm sorry. Did you say something?" Angela was already shocked about our talk about the baby and the chances of our marriage continuing. This just added fuel to the fire. She erupted. Her voice came out as a high-pitched scream. "Why the hell are you kissing my husband?" she screamed. "Ex-husband," snapped Tanya. "And in case you missed it, he was kissing me back." Angela couldn't think of anything to say. For a second, it looked like she was going to pick up one of the large wrenches that I used for making adjustments to the machines. She thought better of it when she noticed that Tanya had her gun on her. "Anyway," said Tanya, "besides getting my kiss, I came out here to tell you both that Rodney Shorter has been captured. He was in a bank in Kansas. He'd started up a relationship with another stupid woman there. I guess this time it took him a little bit longer to get her in bed. One of the other bank employees remembered seeing him on one of those internet lists of wanted criminals and called the police while Rodney took her out to lunch. They caught him right at the hotel with her. God damn it, that guy should just go into adult movie. He's always getting caught screwing some skank. Maybe he should just do that for a living. He'll be back here in town in a couple of days." Angela just stood there with her mouth open. I pulled Tanya to me and kissed her again. "Sweetie, when they bring him in, make sure you get a DNA sample," I said. "Why?" she asked. "It'll speed up the divorce," I said. After Tanya left, Angela started right in again. "That witch is going to be really disappointed," she said, "because we are not getting a divorce." I just shook my head and walked away. 2 days later, the sheriff himself came to the house. "Hi, Sheriff," I said. "What can I do for you?" "You can start out by calling me Steve," he said. "Okay, Steve. Why didn't you just send your deputy?" "Because she would have enjoyed this too damned much," he smirked. "I'm here to arrest your wife." "Okay, I'll get her," I said. It was hard keeping either the joy or the smugness out of my voice. "Don't you want to know why?" he asked. "Not really," I said. "But if you want to tell me, I'll listen." "Shorter had some very interesting things to say," said the sheriff. Of course, I don't believe him any more than I can believe most of what your wife says, but I have to take her into custody while we find out what's true and what isn't. Okay with me, I said. If you guys hadn't needed me to give her a place to stay here in town, I was on the verge of getting a court order to have her removed. Things are that bad? He asked. I just nodded. There was a time when I loved Angela with all of my heart and soul. She hurt me pretty bad by what she did. I tried to do the nice thing and split our assets with the exception of my house with her 50-50, even though she had nothing to do with my business and she kept her own salary to herself. She refused to leave. Now it turns out she's pregnant. Apparently I'm the only one she used birth control with. So much for her she only loved me claims. Man, that's rough, he said. You're so full of shit your eyes are brown, said Angela, over my shoulder. I did love you and I still do. This is just something that happened to us. If I had gotten a disease or been in an accident, would you dump me then too? Of course not, I said. But that's different. How is it different? She asked. Because a disease is something you develop without your control or consent. An accident is something that occurs because of circumstances. It's not something you had a conscious choice in. You chose to sleep with another man and now you're unhappy with the results of your actions, so you're trying to get a do-over, I said. Remember back at your race? She said. You gave that guy in the Camaro a do-over. Why can't you give your wife one? That guy in the Camaro made a mistake, I said. I didn't want to win because he wasn't up to his best. That's what I've been saying since the beginning, she smirked. I made a mistake. But your mistake only became a mistake after you got caught, I snapped. Your actions were intentional. You intended to sleep with that guy, and you did it for a month. The guy in the other car's mistake was unintentional. He was trying to do his best, and he was either nervous or his hand slipped. He wasn't trying to lose. Well, folks, this is where I read Mrs. Blue her rights, said the sheriff. You can come too if you want, Lucas. Not necessary, I said. She knows her lawyer's number. Besides, I have a real date scheduled tonight. Oh, anyone I know? He asked. I nodded again. Be good to her. You never have to ask that, I said seriously. As he started telling Angela her rights, she kept asking him what was going on and screaming and interrupting him until he had to tell her to shut up so he could do it correctly. Then she started in on me. I walked away happily thinking about spending time with Tanya. Meanwhile, Angela. The sheriff had transported me in handcuffs. Originally, he was just going to put me in the car, but I guess when I got upset and started screaming, he had no choice. I have to remember that these people don't like me very much. I honestly didn't see any reason for them to hold me. I wasn't the person who robbed the bank. I was the person who got shot. They put me in an interview room and started asking me questions. I told them that I was pregnant and I needed water and to lie down. Every time they asked me something, I asked for something back. After a couple of hours, the sheriff came in and he wasn't happy. Why didn't you answer my people's questions? He asked me. I knew he wasn't bullshitting and would probably throw me in jail for real. They weren't taking my condition into consideration, I said. You're not far along enough in your pregnancy to have a condition, he said. I also spoke to your doctor. He said that hypothetically, except for your shoulder, which should be nearly healed too, there's nothing wrong with you. Do we have to go through this again? Mrs. Blue, let me remind you one more time that you're not doing yourself any good by acting like an a-hole. You have a perfect right to fight your divorce, and I actually think that it's funny watching my niece squirm while you pull all of your little tricks. It's good for her and your husband too. It's given them time to get to know each other before they rush into something. On the other hand, my investigation has no room for your bullshit. Do you get me? I nodded my head. The problem we have here is that we have two people with a history of lying. Neither of you is telling us anywhere near the same story. You won't tell us a story at all, in fact. Most of the evidence makes it seem like he got to know you and seduced you to get information to facilitate a successful robbery of the bank. But he, of course, tells us a different story. What did he say? I asked. He claims that you were in on it from the beginning and that you told him to shoot Ted. He claimed that there was a pitched battle between him and Ted and you got shot in the crossfire. When he shot Ted, it was in self-defense and he was trying to shoot Ted when he shot you. He said that the only reason he left you there was so you could get medical treatment. He also said that as soon as he got word that you were fine, He intended to come back for you. That's pure bullshit, I said. You can't believe him. Why wouldn't I? Asked the sheriff. Every time we've questioned you, it has been the same story. You lie like a rug until we put pressure on you, and even then we can't believe in what you tell us. The only reason you're not in jail now was because with your husband watching you, we felt pretty sure that you wouldn't leave town. But it really isn't true, I said. Convince me, he said back. Tell you what, let me go and get a tape recorder so I can record the conversation. He left the room and came back about 15 minutes later. I wondered what had taken him so long to get a recorder. I told him the entire story of my life over the past 2 months. I told him how much I loved Lucas and also how much I hated my job at the bank and why. I told him how things started with Jerry and how I had never really enjoyed sex with him. I'd just done it because it made me feel good to have a young man from a big company who traveled all over the country desperate to have me. It validated my sex appeal and proved that those 304s in the bank weren't the only ones who could have someone other than the man they were married to want them. I told him how I hadn't realized it at first, but we started talking about me and my problems, but eventually we always ended up talking about the bank and security procedures. Jerry had made it seem like he was worried about his company's money being safe in a small-town bank, but I could see now that he was just pumping me for information. The sheriff started laughing about that. How do you think your husband would feel about this? He asked me. He'd probably be really hurt badly, I said, especially since Jerry made me do some things that I've never done with him. Lucas has always been very gentle and very loving with me. Maybe that was part of the reason that I went so far with Jerry. I even let him. The sheriff held his hand up for me to stop. You probably don't want to say any more, he said. Okay, you can come in now. I'm already in, I said. Not you, he said. I needed someone who knows you to help me figure out whether or not you're lying. The door opened up and Lucas walked in. He wouldn't even look at me. It looked like he was about to cry. As far as I can tell, she was telling the truth, he said to the sheriff. Lucas, I said. He looked away from me. I'm sorry, Lucas, said the sheriff. If it wasn't important, I wouldn't have made you listen to that. But I had to know. Shorter doesn't have anything to gain by lying. He's already looking at life in prison, and since bank robberies are federal, he may even be looking at the death penalty. This wasn't his crew's first rodeo either. We're trying to get him to roll over on his cronies too. Lucas, my Lucas, just when I thought I couldn't hurt him anymore, I'd gone and done it again. And then she was there holding his hand and kissing him softly on his cheek. She was doing what I should have. I got so angry I couldn't control myself. Without thinking about my shoulder or anything else, I launched myself at that witch. I intended to kill her. It's okay, honey, she told him. I'll make it all better. Not while I'm alive, witch, I screamed, just in time for the sheriff to grab me and wrestle me back into the chair. If you don't control yourself, I'm going to have you restrained, he said. I need to talk to my husband, I said. That's up to him. I was thinking about putting you in a holding cell and letting you avail yourself of the hospitality of the sheriff's department until I sort all of this shit out. But if Lucas is willing to let you stay with him for a while longer, that would be okay too. It would save the county a few bucks. Lucas looked at me seriously. I had never even considered that he might not let me come home. Maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. Even when Lucas caught me in the motel, I never really considered that my marriage was over. For the majority of my adult life, I'd taken Lucas loving me unconditionally as an irrefutable fact. I began to see that I'd screwed up far more seriously than I ever considered. Then there was also the fact that the women in town seemed very eager to pick Lucas up and help get him back on his feet again. I wouldn't have to worry about those skanks at the bank though, because this deputy looked at my husband like a starving woman looks at a steak. And he seemed to be a little hungry too. There she was with her arms all over him, flaunting her obvious affection for him in front of me. Goddamn it, didn't she have any tact? At least she should wait until we were divorced before going after him. Then it hit me. I was the one who'd caused this. I went after Jerry, or at least responded to his advances while I was still married. And when I'd done it, there hadn't been any problems in our marriage. My infidelity was what weakened our union. Lucas, on the other hand, looked at our marriage as if it was already over. From the day that he'd caught me in that motel, he'd said it over and over again. We were done. So in his mind, there was nothing wrong with him finding someone else to love. The fact that she was younger than me prettier than me and obviously built better than me pissed me off. It pissed me off more than the fact that she obviously loved him a lot. I had to figure a way to get Lucas to let me come home. I also had to come up with a way to get him to give me another chance. Thus far, I'd simply assumed that our shared history and time together would trump anyone else from being able to take him away from me. I could see now that I'd been wrong. My strategy of just telling him that I love him, when all of my actions had proven otherwise, was a dismal failure. That which was winning all of the battles, because I hadn't even tried to fight. Lucas, if you let me come home, I'll stop trying to fight or postpone the divorce. You and I can talk about the settlement and everything else every day until we sign the final papers. And if we can't work something out, I'll arrange to move in with my mom as soon as the sheriff's department okays me to leave town, I said. And you'll agree to stop bullshitting us in our investigation, added the sheriff. That too, I said. Lucas nodded and said something to the sheriff. Okay, Mrs. Blue, said the sheriff. I'll have someone run you back out to your home. There's no need to go to all of that trouble, I said. I'll just ride back home with my husband. We were in the middle of a date, said Tanya. We came in to be helpful to the investigation. We're going back to finish where we left off. Yes, ma'am, officer ma'am, said Lucas smiling. Tanya took his hand and led him back out of the room. Holy shit, I hope you get him back, said the sheriff. She won't be much good to me if the two of them end up together and she's my best man. I guess as her uncle, I should be happy for her, because she hasn't been this happy in a very long time. But as the sheriff, I'm kind of worried. Through an extreme effort, I held back the screw you that I was getting ready to throw at him, but just barely. The next few weeks brought changes that I'd never have foreseen only a few months ago. Lucas and I had started out that first day after he let me come home by having morning sessions where we discussed things. It was almost like the way we used to get out of bed together and talk about our lives and our goals and our dreams while we had breakfast. The difference was that we weren't sleeping together. Lucas was still the same considerate man that I love. He even got up and made me breakfast before all of the discussions. There were several times when he even came to wake me before breakfast. I was getting weaker, but I still hadn't begun to show more than just a bulge on my tummy. When Lucas knocked one morning, I told him to come in. On days when I just didn't feel like getting up, he'd bring me my breakfast in bed and sit on the chair beside the bed while we worked out a compromise on whatever we were arguing about. That morning was the straw for me. That was the morning that I decided that Tanya had to die. As Lucas walked in the room that morning, I'd purposefully left the covers off and made sure I'd be exposed when he came in the room. Lucas took one look at my nearly naked body and said, "Sorry," and backed out. That was the first time that Lucas had ever done that. Since we'd been together, even when we argued, my body had never failed to get Lucas excited. Usually, I could wrap him around my little finger just by opening my legs a hint. I watched his reaction very carefully that morning, and there was none. If Lucas had been aroused, or if he'd even just come in and taken me, it would have ended all of this stupid divorce talk. But he hadn't. I'd only tried it because the previous day, while talking about the divorce, which we'd finally pretty much finished except for two major sticking points, we'd started talking about the old days before all of this shit started. I'd seen a wishful look in his eyes. I was sure then that I had a chance. And a chance was all I needed to break them up. I'd forgotten, though, how honest Lucas is.